Hi. Second live feed thing is another one of my, because I am all exceedingly new to this. Realized that it was hovering out there in the middle of nowhere and the people were seeing or not seeing. I was waiting for people to kind of come into the hangout, and then I would go live with people there. And there may be nobody coming in. I don't know. Hi. Oops, I better shut off my thing here. Thing is another one of my microphone. On the other thing, I'm going to get feedback. Oh, Jen. I was going to bring up the subject because of the new Dunkirk movie and Dinesh D'Souza, the little troll, skip and a jump secondary complaint that there was supposedly this terrible complaint at the USA Today about that there were not enough women and people of color in the film. And when I tracked down all the daisy chain, all it was a laudatory review in USA Today where they happened to mention the obvious, that there weren't a hell of a lot of people of that particular persuasion in there. There wasn't really a criticism. And because I know an awful lot about film and an awful lot about history, there's a lot to discuss, and how history has been dealt with in motion pictures, the limitations you have whenever you're trying to do that, how some screw things up spectacularly. I'll stick the hangout thing here again, since I am reaching the point where I don't care how many people see the damn thing. Bridges of too many people coming in and jumping on me. And I didn't realize, that this thing hovers out in the middle of nowhere. I still have to figure out how to, down if nothing gets activated. And okay. At the moment, I'm kind of like a monologue here. Point out, and I did in a little short video I did on Dinesh D'Souza bombing Dunkirk. I'd be curious, if I ever get a chance to see the Dunkirk movie, whether or not Lightoller shows up in it, because the first officer of the Titanic survived the Titanic, obviously. Ended up a yachtsman of some accomplishment, and he helped rescue people at Dunkirk. One of those strange ironies of life thing that I would be looking as a little detail. Did they include Lightoller into the storyline? Yeah, but a cool monologue, Strike. Yeah. Cool. Here is bloody 91 degrees. I had to rush up to the store and pick up some ice cream. And I go through ice like nobody's business in here because I only got the one little ice cube tray, so it gets to be quite a pain. But there's been a long-standing issue. History is dealt with films, and historians have written whole books on the subject. I've got quite a few of them, which I've enjoyed reading over the years. It was notorious back in the old 1930s and 40s. The French government actually had a conniption fit over the movie Suez, when they fictionalized everything so wildly that the government was saying, hey, what? They had Ferdinand de Lesseps having an affair, I think, with Empress Eugenie, and the time frame was all completely wrong, and so it was just terrible. Even films that are trying to be historically accurate can get really gummed up about it, especially if they have an ideology. It's clear down to 81 here, coolest since February. Yeah, get out that parka, Brian. Yeah. The whole country seems to be awash with heat, and that isn't helping our political tempers anyway. So anyway, somebody got a video cam that comes in a video setup where they want to jump in thing other than just me monologuing back and forth. Movies, of course, come up interestingly because they relate, especially the more recent that they are, that you have actual experiences on the subject. Tora was actually quite meticulously done. There were a few little quibbly bits one could have with Patton, but otherwise it was fairly accurate. And sometimes you have films that kind of run off the rails, are loosely based on historical things. Farther back you go in time, by the time you hit the Roman Empire and stuff, you're to some extent making stuff up, inevitably, because you have such a limited historical range. So all the kind of dramatic incidents in memoirs that you can then feed off of, as Coppola did with writing the screenplay for Patton, doesn't apply when you're dealing with what Caesar and Cleopatra were doing boinking back in the first century BC. I've always loved a good historical film, that not a film that's 2.5 hours or 3 hours long, big story, you're going to have to leave crap out. A tight editing to try to figure out what you want to put in and what you don't. And so there's the inevitable context that even if you want to be and are as scrupulous as all get out, that you'll be trimming the stuff just to keep it in frame. Yeah, some of the historical westerns were so much BS. Yeah, they really didn't start fiddling with this comment from Brian. They didn't really start playing around with a bit more accuracy in westerns until the 1960s. And this was coming in from the era when a lot of directors were feeling a bit of an angst over how Native Americans were being treated and almost never played by Native Americans in films. And John Ford had that attitude as well, where he helped do Cheyenne Autumn, which tried to redress a bit of the tale. Indians were starting to be a little more realistically portrayed in elements of how the West was won. But really, until you get into the modern era, when you get all the way down to, oh, yipes, the one that Kevin Costner did, Dancing with Wolves, at that level, and when you did the, oh gosh, I can't think of the name off the hand of the director, but did the really good version of Mohicans, where they had Native Americans playing the roles, and you had some very powerful sequences that way, even though it was set in the 18th century. And there were some quibbles with some of the historical details on it, but it got an awful lot of the essence of it right. I always look for, do you get the big picture correct? And then how much of the little fiddly bit details can you get? The history, the West is always very different from what we expect it to be. It was less wild than everyone thought. Time a bit creepier than we thought, because if you look at it from the perspective of how Native Americans were getting the short end of the stick, or how large cattle interests and others were running into things, it makes for a complex and murky story. If you had somebody like director who just died, or not recently, I can't think of the name of the director right off the bat. My sister-in-law, ex-sister-in-law, was in extra somewhere as an immigrant on one of the trains in Heaven's Gate when they were filming it. It just went colossally over budget, and it was reflecting the kind of Howard Zinn left-wing view of capitalism run amok and trampling over the rights of everyone and bringing in immigrants to serve the interests of the moneyed class. That was kind of the leitmotif of that. And there are bits and pieces of which that's actually true. But things were always much more complicated than that in real life. The stories in general, when you're dealing with colonization issues, the same issues come up, and I think are starting to come up more in Australian cinema as they start paying more attention to their checkered past. They have a much more recent one than in the United States, and they had the oddity that so much of it related to the fact that Australia was essentially a giant penal colony and was relatively sparsely populated, even with the Aboriginals at the time that they came in. So there were different dynamics that went on, but they have skeletons in their closets too. Ooh, looking at the comments, most peeps don't know Lincoln had natives hung for being territorial after treaties were trashed. Yeah, the whole issue of how all the administrations played around with those matters are tough. It could be argued that Lincoln had a lot more on his plate than to worry about that. And of course, General Sherman from the Civil War ended up as the no good Indian, but a dead Indian one. To some extent, I'm trying to just pull up my memory of thoughts about the frontier issues. Essentially, he didn't want more problems on his plate. The last things you would want to do would be to murk things up in relation to potential things where you would have to have soldiers dealing with people out in Wyoming or Utah, rather than fighting Lee's army as they were supposed to. So remember, Lincoln started out prejudiced against blacks. He kind of mellowed on that. Even somebody as notorious as often came down in many ways on the side of the Indians. There was a whole big issue about how much of the network of supply chains were actually controlled by people who were overcharging everybody. And there was a congressional hearing, I think in 1875 or so, where Custer came in and testified about how the Indians were getting gypped. We don't normally associate that with him, but you get into some very complicated dynamics of how people have agendas, and they have their personality issues, and the cliques between one branch of the military and another. And it's always tough to figure out how you're going to condense down a tale that's very intricate and nuanced into something that you can fit into a 2-hour or 2.5 hours time slot. I'd have to say that the first Civil War story, the first Lincoln biography that ever resonated well with me, was the one recently with Daniel Day-Lewis. He's got Lincoln down beautifully. And they compiled and condensed this and that and thus and such, but the big picture issues were being conveyed very, very effectively. And it was not only technically meticulous, but it got the essence of it right. And I always like to hope in any good film, I'm willing to cut any film a little bit of slack. The take-home's pretty correct, and it doesn't make any egregious problem. That's why no matter how much I can appreciate the cinematography innovations of Birth of a Nation, the old D.W. Griffith Birth of a Nation, it's Ku Klux Klan racist claptrap. And so I'm always got that giant footnote on there. No, there's not really much true about this. Yeah, colony's never a simple thing. It's a safe bet to say that no people on Earth a good colonial power, period. We don't normally think of the Dutch and the Belgians, but boy, when they ran colonies, they were. Almost a matter of you export your thugs and your sons of bitches in the place. And there's no way that you can manage to operate in a way that doesn't start demeaning you as well as the people you're ruling. We ran into that in the Philippines. As a general principle, any system, no matter how benign, if it thinks it can run other people's lives, you're getting into trouble. Well, this is a long way from the film era, a film issue. I've always, where are your general location? BJ Price. Yeah, let's find out. I'm in Spokane, Washington, up in the Northwest, the brown side of the state. Ontario in Canada. Okay. I used to live in Ontario, California, which was founded by people who emigrated from Ontario, Canada. So there is a weird around the corner through the woods connection then, BJ. How about that tenuousness? Yeah, I've never been that far Canada. I've only just been up into British Columbia and Alberta. But I've seen pictures of the eastern part of the country, and I imagine it resembles a great deal of what we would be seeing in Minnesota and Wisconsin and that bunch. I've kind of flown over it viscerally. My Phileas Fogg stories, but that's in the 1870s, so I think it's changed some since. Oh, line of storms here to Inverness, Florida. Woo! course, storms come up kind of all the time. The one time I'm not in the stream and James is beating on the Dutch. Naughty James. Yeah, I suspected you would pick up on that. And it's not a specific thing about the Dutch. It's about any people that become a colonial power. It's as true of the Chinese or any people on Earth. The moment they think the Aztecs were just as sons of bitchy to the Maya when they controlled things. So it's just an intrinsic property of where you have an imperial state that tries to tell other people how they're supposed to live, and you don't give them a say in their own lives. That's boop, everybody. Used to go to Boulder for vacation every year with stopovers in Peterborough. We're talking Colorado there. Anybody wants to come in to the chat here? I'm a lonely talking head. That's what I was kind of hoping for, to get some film buffs and people who love the various history ends. I'd studied stuff with films like Nicholas and Alexandra and Patton and the like, that was in the basically World War I, World War II era, more recent. Oh, Boulder on. Oh, okay, that's there too. City of me to realize that there are many places in the world that have the same name. How extremely to do that. That's funny. We don't find a heck of a lot of Spokanes, although there apparently is a Spokane, Missouri, which I'm assuming was named by somebody who found Spokane, Washington too boring and found it in there because it's an Indian name. Either that or it's a weird coincidence because it is a highly specific piece of terminology. The same reason you don't get Puyallup and those sorts of things popping up anywhere else. The one thing I do like about cultures is when they kind of own up to their history and start bringing back the original names. The big renovation that we're doing down here in the old World's Fair site, Canada Island, which was the place where the Canada Pavilion was during the World's Fair, was called Canada Island for years and years, but they've decided to go back to the Indian name for it to honor the Spokane Indians a bit more, and I say, yay, go for it. Keg R, Princess Sodalite Mine, Little Miss, oh, Sudbury, oh, the Copperfields, yeah. Yeah, that kind of brings back a bit. That would be more towards kind of Toronto-ish area, and I'm probably sounding like a complete git because it's not a tiny province. I did kind of notice a snippet of it because I'm setting one of those scenes in the second novel, and maybe this came up in one of our earlier chats somewhere, in the Thunder Bay area over on the west side of Lake Superior. A neat little spot that was relatively underpopulated and not yet served by trains and the like, that would fit into a spot where I decided to have the Albatross airship built and to figure out how it could be the way Rockhound since 1963. Been to Sudbury, saw one tree. Yeah, there's so many places I would like to visit. I do recommend for anybody that does get out to the western side of Canada and you're a paleontology buff, the Royal Tyrrell Museum up there in Drumheller is just spectacular. Holy moly. I think it's got a better set of exhibits than the Smithsonian, frankly. They've got some just amazing range of fossils, and they're very nicely done. You can see Tomoshan fauna, and there's just a nice displays on there. And that's when I was there, like, yipes, 10, 15 some odd years ago. So I'm sure that they've improved it even more there. I laugh all that. There's a tree. Yeah, that's true of a lot of places in Washington State, too. Once you get out of the wet side of the state and come down the Cascades, it's a dry desert most of the time. And except for the irrigation that you get from the croplands from the Columbia River, the place is dry, sagebrush, all that kind of stuff. I find it a kind of eerie scenicness at times, but I wouldn't want to live there. It's a little too not tree-ish for me. Heller was closed when you went there. I am sorry. Rats. Boy, the whole museum? I know they've got there's also live digs and people can go out on renovations or something. Well, I am pissed off because you were cheated from a spectacular dance, RJ, dance. You missed a really wonderful one. One museum, a couple museums I'd love to see, but I've never had the money to get there. I'd like to see the Carnegie in Chicago, and I'd also like to see the big Museum of Natural History there in New York. But unfortunately, my finances have never got anywhere near. It's got a rat pretty stuff. They've got an awful lot of not any great sauropods. Although I must say they had a which was the first time I was able to see. Camerosauruses are kind of kissing cousins. And that was the head. The Camarasaurus head was what was slapped onto the air quotes Brontosaurus for years, rather than an Apatosaurus style head, which is the one that we tend to use now after they made the correction on it. So everybody thought there was this big clunky large headed critter. But if you've seen a Brontosaurus, then you know how big a Camarasaurus head is. But the animal was somewhat smaller. I think in mass it was actually smaller than a Diplodocus. So relatively lightly built. Carnaby should all-American bucket lists, yeah. And I would see if I could actually say hi to Dr. Lowe, the paleontologist out there who I have communicated with and sent me lots of wonderful freebie papers of his and others. When I did Slam Dunk, he sent me a free PDF of the Allen paper from 1975, which was relatively rare to get. And that allowed me to fillet, slice, and dice Dwayne Gish in one of the chapters of Slam Dunk. So I've been highly dependent on the kindness of strangers. They may have upgraded the Smithsonian, Brian. I was relatively unimpressed when I was visiting it back in the 1980s. I know they've done a lot of renovations and stuff since, but they have relatively limited range of stuff. You got some synapsids. I know they have a Dimetrodon. They've got a cast of an Apatosaurus, but that's the same one that's in the Carnegie. That's the Plodicus carnegii, and that's the same one that was, I think they pulled it out in the British Museum of Natural History, as they say. Oh, rockhound chipped at the Canadian Shield in Ontario feed a long-buried bacteria that eats granite by 1 foot a year. Ooh, that sounds neat. Ooh, yeah. If you can give me some specs on that, BJ, I'd like to look up the paper on that. I may have it in Tough Son Bitch Eats the Feldspar. Yeah. Justin Lebach, hi Justin, what's the greatest cartoon you have ever seen? Why is that a shill question? Because I thought I had mentioned the fact that for me, it's a close toss-up between The Rabbit of Seville with Bugs Bunny and Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century. Buck. Those are really the three spectacular ones. Duck Amuck is pure cinema. That's the one where poor Daffy Duck gets tossed into this surreal animated world where the eraser is coming down and eliminating the backgrounds around it. And it's the purest of cartoon cinema because it's surrealistic. It instantly jumps back and forth from one thing to another. It's absolutely... Rabbit of Seville, I think, is better than the What's Opera Doc, which is the one that usually gets used, and that was one of oh yipes, the cartoonist's Chuck Jones's favorite. But I like Rabbit of Seville better. For one thing, it's got Carl Stalling doing the music direction, and it is just razor sharp. The scene where Bugs Bunny jumps on top of Elmer Fudd's head and has put a bunch of scalp massage on it, and he's using his feet as the massager running around on the top, and the music is and the expression on Bugs Bunny's face is absolutely fabulous. And then Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century, which is just the most epic, hilarious parody of all of the space opera things, and it's poor Daffy Duck at his most sublimely put upon. Yeah. What movies have made me cry? Oh, wow. Rocky never did it for me. I have to say no. But there is a movie that, in fact, the music, even, if I hear the music burbling, and that is West Side Story. Wow. Oh, it's happening right now because I'm recalling the movie. The scene where... yipes! She's the actress that played Maria in it. Yep, it'll come to me from The Great Race. Anyway, where she just boyfriend has been killed, and the other ones are going to come over, the other gang members, and she says, "Don't you touch him! Intensity, stay away!" And it just, yeah, that one is tremendously powerful. When I'm in the right mood, I get pretty teary-eyed at the ending of It's a Wonderful Life. That, yeah, if it has a bunch of minor notes, that'll get me too. It's not even that. Music is immensely powerful, but it's also the content of it. That here were two people who, for each other, live together simply because of all of the baggage that their cultures are carrying with it. And boy, is that a universal story. So it was true for Shakespeare, and it's true for Leonard Bernstein, who, after all, was a who recognized things. They had they were originally going to make it black versus white gangs, but that turned out to be a little too incendiary for the 1950s, so they turned it into the Hispanic versus white gang. And there were a lot of little tidbits of when it was made at MGM. Unit was kind of doing it at arm's length because Arthur Freed didn't like Leonard Bernstein's music. It was too dissonant and aggressive for him. And I'm going, oh, you poor chap. Oh, my. And Robert Wise directed it. My wonderful, great film editor style. His ability to handle musicals under the right circumstances. It didn't always work for him because Star didn't click. Even though he had a fabulous cast and good music and stuff, but it just kind of wandered around. But The Sound of Music, of course, clicked just beautifully. Musicals are tough to do. Anyway, Nitrobacter and Nitrosomonas. Let me make a little note on those because I want to kind of look those up. You know, those are the ones that eat the feldspar and crap. Okay, I may or may not already have some material in there because novel technologies like that always interest me, and they often come up in relation to how organisms might survive on alien planets, how you might have unusual metabolisms, all that. So it can potentially have interesting connections, even if pan out in other ways. Plus, it's just usually kick butt interesting. Oh, Theo, oh, there we go. That's another, up a couple of lines. Thank you so much, kids. Yeah. Okay. Who is it that takes notes while watching the live chat on a YouTube video? You think Kent Hovin does that? I don't think so. But any information that pops up, yeah, maybe I'll be checking up on it because I never take anybody's word for it, including mine. So when I track down a thing, it's one of the reasons why I like to track down primary sources. I'll watch a video on something that has some interesting shit in it, real. And even if it's on a regular channel, even if it's on PBS and that, it can be problematic maybe, and you need to kind of check out the primary sources and see if you can ground it in regular technical literature, or in the case when we're talking about history and other matters, in any of the proper historical channels. That means it's got legs. Get a better traction on it than something that's only popped up on a bloody website. Come on, folks, nobody want to come over and hang out with me for video here? Maybe. I don't bite, although I do devour creationists. Be fun to get somebody with some of the other historical periods that are involved in here. Stuff I investigated tons on Cleopatra and fall of the Roman Empire and Spartacus and I, Claudius, and all that, because I was very interested in the period, and so I was always curious to see how much of it was accurate and how much not. The Rome series as well. That's one of my delicious hobby horses. I got interested in the whole Plantagenet era and Henry II down to King John and Eleanor of Aquitaine from watching The Lion in Winter. Wow! What? Oh, hello, Justin.
Hey.
Somebody popped in.
Yeah, just for you. Okay.
I hope you didn't ask me that cartoon question just out as a shill question, that because you knew about my interests on that you were actually curious about it.
I was actually curious.
The animated form is really intriguing, and from a film music point of view, I think very interesting because it's the purest form of cinema. It can have instantaneous transitions. It's faster than a cartoon. You can have just something that's why Duck Amuck is so classic, because you can literally have Duck standing there and suddenly an eraser comes in and wipes his body out and then puts in all of these weird extra body and strange things with flippers and stuff on there. And how do you orchestrate that? How do you write the music to that? It might only take on film. And how can you turn on a dime kaleidoscopically? Carl Stalling was much more sophisticated musically. Franklin, who took over afterwards and was the guy that did the music on What's Opera Duck. Of course, by the late 60s, it was getting pathetic because the Warner Brothers was falling apart as a studio, and so the budgets down and down and down to where in the old days, the old classic Bugs Bunny cartoons, piece Warner Brothers orchestra, but you were reduced down to a tiny little jazz ensemble. Franklin, and so he didn't have the orchestral palette to work with. The newer stuff that Steven Spielberg helped produce, the Animaniacs and that sort of stuff, the people that worked on that really consciously imitated the Warner Brothers, classic Warner Brothers style. That actually helped revive that motif. They would make allusions to classical music and stuff that was probably contrail, way over the heads of the kids that were doing it, but because they knew about the connections that were taking place in the music that was going on in the old classical cartoon era. And anything that can sneak in to the past, I'm happy to do that. When I don't know how many of those out there happen to watch the silly Svengoolie show on MeTV. He's stumbled on it by accident because he's a guy that dresses up like a vampire and has a little coffin, and they bring an old movie on, and then they show the cut, but then they'll have the fillers with snarky comments, and they'll do a little comic routine thing and all the rest on it. And he's been doing this for like 20 or 30 years out of Chicago, and it's now kind of a syndicated thing. And he has a cult following, including moi, because as I stumble on them, once in a while I would see a title on there of a film I hadn't seen before up in any of the other venues. So I was just looking at it because where else would you have a chance to see a particularly cheesy old vampire movie or something? And I really like the approach to it because he really treats it with both whimsy and the worst puns you're ever going to hear are on that bloody show. It's just shameless. But he also loves the craft. We'll talk about the people that are in the show and who did the special effects and who the makeup artists were and who did the sets and all the other things. And he'll follow up and give biographies of the people. And sometimes he'll even bring them on and interview them when he can track them down. And so here's a guy and a sensibility for the stuff. In addition, it is just a light, humorous thing in the same kind of a vein as Mystery Science 3000. But they were just pure humor. They didn't have that kind of background bit. So I've actually learned a lot about stuff. A cheesy old movie that had a young guy in it. It was probably made in the late 40s or early 50s. And this one kind of like the girlfriend's boyfriend for like 10 minutes, and you never really noticed him much. But Svengoolie pointed out, oh, that's the actor who is playing Uncle Owen in Star Wars. And he shows the pictures and stuff from him. And I'm going, I would never have known that any other way. Let's check over here and then jump in there, Justin, so I can take a breath and show people I can breathe.
My girlfriend just popped in, so I'm out of here. So, all right, nice talk.
Bye, kid. Take precedence over old farts. I easily appreciate that. He's been a really wonderful friend here. He lives locally. I have the ink in my printer and this camera that I'm using because of his gift. So this is a kid that I greatly appreciate the help that I've gotten from him as somebody with more ambition than money and means. So let's zip back over on needing to be logged into view. Yeah, I hope if anybody else has got a camera, I'm still hoping to bump into somebody who's as much of a movie geek as I am, that can drop in and we can have the live chat on here, because there are so many historical films. It's hard to think of a period trampled on by film somewhere by somebody at some stage, not merely in the English language, but also in foreign language. I bumped into some of this kind of really early on when I became a Titanic buff. All the different versions of the Titanic that have been done over the years, and it's fun to see the different perspectives that people do and how our history of what we think the Titanic is changes over time. Cameron had to acknowledge that when they actually, a later bunch of scientists did on the Titanic, they let him know, sorry, but your movie is wrong. The Titanic couldn't get that high up into the air before it went plap. The hull couldn't handle it. It probably only went up about, like about that, and then it would have went splat. We know the ship started to break apart because they know that forensically they ended up in two different spots. So there's stuff that we pieced together. So we have a better idea of what was going on with the Titanic today than anyone would previously. What's going on over the last? Yes, no results for blah, 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 blah. Okay. I'm trying to think of right offhand of a film that's ranked as the most get the point across films historically. I put Patton up on that list. Essence of the guy and the period and the issues involved very well. It was so well written, co-written by North, who I think worked on, I can't remember whether it was Day the Earth Stood Still, that he wrote the screenplay for that, and then co-wrote Patton with Francis Ford Coppola, who was in somewhat dire straits at the time, and discovered to his amazement that 20th Century Fox was going ahead with the production, and they hadn't kind of let him know about it. He did an introduction to the current video versions of it. But performance, it's got the essence of the thing fairly effective. Important. Nicholas and Alexandra, which is the film that Schaffner did right after that, I think is another one that holds up extremely well. I've often brought it up because Tom Baker, the Fourth Doctor, played Rasputin, and it's just a kick-butt performance in it. But it has a really good cast, a broad range of people. It got kind of mixed reviews at the time. Some were quibbling over the kind of Nicholas. He was actually right on target. Everybody in it was really doing quite nicely, and it was an intricate subject matter, and covered a very complex period, the rise of Russia, and as we know, in the communist era. And I think they got the essence of it nicely. There was a culture that was, family was just disconnected from reality. Sometimes they would try to do reforms, but it wouldn't pan out well. And then things kind of unraveled and went out of control. And then they ended up being in a just sad ending of the thing. For years, the versions that were available trimmed some of the film down. And one of the advantages in the old days before the cableization of everything was you would often get uncut versions of films or longer versions of films because they wanted to pad out the stuff on television. Years I had seen Nicholas and Alexandra with a particular scene that just struck me like a ton of bricks, how powerful it was. There was after the intermission thing and World War I has finally kicked in, there's this a poignant scene where the battles are going badly out between the Germans and the Russians, and this Russian commander is to people, and he just wanders out into a field and takes out a pistol and blows his brains out, symbolizing the unraveling of the whole Russian military structure in that scene. And it was not in the standard video version of it. And finally, when they did a longer DVD edition of it where they brought out the original theatrical release. That was back in, and it pissed me off before because it just comes right before you jump to the Empress doing hospital work. Contrast between what was going on in the outer world with what her little bubble was experiencing. There was a reason why it was there in the film. And I always like to say, you may disagree or not with the way a director puts together the scene, but I always want to see it the way they did it. I want to see what their vision was. Then I can take it apart or quibble with it or not. Ooh, we got some comments down in here. Members like troll posts on the geology pages. Flat Earth just not welcome. Well, Flat Earth is an abomination unto reason in general. And so you're hitting an extreme Tortucan mind. Dynamically, it's indistinguishable from young Earth creationists or intelligent design in terms of the fact that they're, but it's in such distilled, intense form with a flat earther because they're basically taking away, like with an Uzi, almost all of science. I mean, they're shredding the last 2,500 years of science, not just the last 1,000 years or 500 years. So there's cause you to want to bang your head with a heavy book reaction. Earther that takes a slower boil and an even slower boil with somebody like a Steve Meyer, but it's the same boil. It just has to do with the time it takes you to do it. Yeah, every field of it. Yeah, I mean they have to get rid of geography. They have to get rid of cosmology and astronomy. They have to basically junk Newton and Einstein. They can't figure out why objects have mass and why things do what they do, why falling bodies do what they do, why planets are the way they are, why there are eclipses the way they are. I mean, it's just of dumb for flat earthers. And when you look, and we've seen them do that when we examined Jeranism and all that on Sci-Strike's movie nights, it's the same shtick. Videos, you get cliche pictures. Once in a while, somebody will come up with the cute little map or the cute little experiment with the blue toilet water bowl, like we had with the guy on the last show, and it's strained and pathetic. Channel for Ontario. Oh, okay. Well, we got a lot of people going on in areas having nothing whatsoever to do with what I'm doing over here. So I'm almost feeling like it's that I'm spinning my wheels in here. Nobody got a camera. Gosh, I'm trying to think of what. Oh, Egypt. That's another area that's relatively little coverage. Relatively little about pre-Columbian America. Apocalypto. Quirky to watch in a kind of creepy out sort of way. It was daring. The director, and my brain farts in here to remember what the hell his name was. Temptation of the Christ thing, but earlier. But doing it in Mayan was an interesting effect. What bothered me about it, what bothered me about the film was he kind of compressed the cultural frame a bit because he's kind of the Maya culture deteriorated over many centuries. It had its big heyday in the 7th and 8th centuries and kind of fell back, and maybe a bit earlier than that, and then kind of went in a mode where certain cities just kind of disappeared altogether and got overgrown, and other ones that the Maya culture never disappeared. They're still there, but they were constantly kind of moving from one increasingly stressed ceremonial center to the next. And then along came the Nazis of their period, the Aztecs, who built their great big empire. The really I had with the Aztecs was a very different one than they would have been in their old heyday when they were the top dogs on the mark. And then finally, the very end of the scene, when suddenly they turn and there's a European ship, and I'm going, wait a minute, all of this stuff has been taking place in the early 15th century, or early 16th century, and I'm going, I think they've kind of compressed into one tight package for its own good. It's kind of the same problem that went into in the old Quest for Fire movie. they tried to compress almost the entire history from Neanderthal down to humans and the development of fire and language, all in one, tracing one group of people wandering around. And so there was always a disconnect chronologically on that. People, yeah, a bunch of others are saying flowing away. Well, I got 8 viewers on here, and is it a thumbs up for me to still blither blather on and talk about other stuff, or not? What in the in the actual feed here, other than the ones on the live chat? Then I have to figure out. Well, I guess it'll shut down properly when I hit the stop broadcast thing. I'm still getting really on how to handle something that hasn't gone into full live broadcast mode yet. I didn't realize it was hanging out. Yes, blather away. We'll try to stay on topic. I can wander off kilter at a moment's notice. The Egyptians pull out 20,000 BC, which was Emmerich's hallucination vision of what pre-Egyptians were like. But Egyptians have gotten a bad. Too many of them were basically seen as we have to have some Bible element to it, and so you get the Egyptians with the Exodus naturally, the Egyptian, which was a adequate novel that was a big budget film that came out with oh yipes, I can't think of the not Purdom, something like that. Who I think is still around. He was playing in little minor B movies fairly recently, and has managed to hold up halfway well. But anyway, was in this big biblical Egyptian epic that was set during Akhenaten's period, which about what 1100, a little bit King Tut just before that, and it was kind of a flaccid film. The actor, Jews building the pyramids. Yeah, the famous one with Joan Collins, Land of the Pharaohs from 1955-ish, which is fun. I think Dmitry Tiomkin wrote a nice score for it. I saw that as a kid, and for years that corrupted my view of Egypt. I was really pissed off when I discovered that pyramids didn't have these fantastically labyrinthine interiors with all these tripwire sand pits and things that could cause blocks to come down and all that. I go, damn, the Warner Brothers pyramids were much better than this. Oh, I may have just suggested to the YouTuber history buffs to have you on to come over to talk about movies. I'm listening, but seeing where else I might whore you out. Whore away, Nim. Easy, so long as I've got the time available and stuff, I can get on fairly at a moment's notice. I'm usually working on until I actually shut down, and then I'm working on a novel or something else and winding down before going to bed. But I'm usually multitasking. So in fact, all earlier in the day, I was plugging material in where I just finished off pulling in my latest technical literature. And there was stuff that I suddenly discovered, that I hadn't noticed before in the context of stuff that popped up, be tracking that into the system. Because the goal, Troubles in Paradise methodology of creationism, the goal of it is to get ahead of the game, to be on top of the technical literature that's relevant for fires to occur, and then you try to come in after the fact, and then also to be on top of the anti-evolution game. Fortunately, the anti-evolutionists self-identify. They self-publish their stuff. The Discovery Institute's got their little Nona Bene things. They send me their emails every week, and so I know exactly what they think is their important stuff. So if they think it's important, it's important. You, Ross, when he trots out gee whiz posts and stuff, I add that into the system. Any Answers in Genesis tweets that I don't already have in my system that are referring to technical literature, that gets into the mix. So gradually I'm building up a master cataloging of all that has ever been cited by anti-evolutionists, essentially from the 1960s on. That's kind of a neat data set to have, and it's allowed me to drop anvils on anti-evolutionists with, I hope, a level of precision. Oh, let's say these guys run 24/7 hang-up on a few bunks, general engineering and science. Oh, yeah, that's something else altogether. Yeah, any areas where might be helpful. Sometimes I'll pop into some of these live chats, and it may be just the same sniping back and forth between talking heads where you don't really get anywhere, don't really learn something interesting. In that respect, it's kind of wheel spinning. To my mind, if you have well-informed people who know their field well, can genuinely have a conversation. Boring things. Jackson's interview with P.Z. Myers was really fun because they were shop talking biology and systematics and other things, and I was just kind of peeking over the corner and checking some of the topics that came up. In a few cases, I was checking my reference base to see what was going on. Jackson had mentioned some things about mammoth phylogeny and systematics, and which was related to what in terms of the split between the mastodons and the mammoths. And I did some quickie little checks and found out, oh, I actually stumbled on a paper I didn't know about that had just come out that appeared in, I think, PLOS 1 that I hadn't been aware of, that I came upon because I was doing this little tracking background issues that were being come up in the discussion. So you get stuff from all sorts of different directions. Tough ass subject to keep up. Conspired the simple stuff like the simple stuff like physics. Yeah, series of spider tendrils that I've done on Twitter. I found Twitter way more useful than Facebook. Facebook is basically the equivalent of how many cat pictures can you put up. Oh yeah, mammoth skulls look like cyclops heads. Yeah. There's kind of a curious, oh, we were supposed to be talking about Dunkirk. A survivor of that said it was accurate. Yeah, that's what I've heard too. That, yes, my gosh, back to the actual topic of the matter. Yeah, from everything I've heard about it, it was very meticulously accurate and detailed, and that quite a lot of the surviving members of Dunkirk that have seen the thing, they were very moved by it and struck because it's very visceral for them, although they said that the music wasn't as noisy in 1940. So there have been several ones that have appeared on the various talk shows and that about it. Nolan is a very meticulous guy, and he likes to film in camera. He doesn't like to use special effects, absolutely necessary, although I'm sure in a lot of the material that they were making use of green screens and other things because the technology is advanced, and for just safety purposes, it's much easier to deal with. But a lot of it is involving water. So I'm sure the vast majority of it was filmed in real locations and under real kinds of settings, and was annoying as hell to handle because of that physical infrastructure. But Nolan likes that. I'm movies in my collection personally because I'm great at seeing a film of Nolan, and very few of his stuff are ones that I am fond of after the fact. The one that he did on the Prestige, at the same time as the Illusionist, about magic. I've seen it. Excellent cast, well written, ingenious, twisty plot. To see it again, it's okay. But The Illusionist, I adore The Illusionist. I can literally watch that again and again, even though I know every second of it, because there's something about its mood. And it surprised me too, because it has music by somebody I'm not terribly fond of, the minimalist Philip Glass. And he actually wrote effective and appropriate score. It's just balanced right. So that reveals more about RJ's brain and my tastes and interest of things. People crying and that all the vibes about it are that it's an extremely well crafted and moving, and I'm certainly anxious to see it. Every one of these eras, there's so many stories can be told. Kenneth Branagh was really quite vivid about it. He was helping plug the show, and he was on Coulter, or not Coulter. Oh, wash my mouth out with lie. And did a really marvelous Plug for the motion picture and almost Shakespearean eloquence style actor. It's the sort of, had Laurence Olivier been alive, and he would have had a part in it at some point. I am curious. I do hope that they've got the little Lightoller bit. Is one Benny Hill CD1 and the Rifleman and Ollie. Oh boy, that's an interesting. I grew up watching television. They were well crafted. I think I can't remember, they were hour long or half hour. They still show them on MeTV all the time, so you can actually catch the Rifleman. Benny Hill, that's a marvelous case of an acquired taste, that you will either that he is a weirdly hilarious mixture of incredibly childish, crude British humor, full, sharp-witted, and it's a delightful thing. I'd actually first spotted Benny Hill without realizing it, because he's the fireman in their flying machines, and he doesn't play part in it. So you kind of easily overlooked. He never really had much of a dramatic career beyond it. There are some comedians who are actually extremely good playing dramatic parts. Some, of course, like Robin Williams, demonstrated that. Others were a bit like fireworks that you could never quite contain well on film. Jonathan Winters was that way, although if you want to see the best balanced of his performances, the one where he just clicks as well as he's ever going to, and that's in It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, especially the long cut that had been cut from the film that involved some of the sequences that were setup scenes for Jonathan Winters are in there. But he was never attainable in film, and improv comics like that were always troublesome. Now Stan and Ollie, they're another areas. They, of course, straddle the silent era all the way into sound. They were always visual comedians because they started out in that mode, but they were able to handle things effectively in sound as well. I was never a great Ollie fan. They were a little bit too slow and fey for my area. There was a kind of a bit of a cruelty Oliver Hardy's character, although, as tended to be the case in reality, the one that played the heavy in the team was actually the one that was the nicest. Stan Laurel actually had a very personality, a complex mind, and Oliver Hardy was kind of a pussycat in reality. He did do some acting independent. Old film, yipes, I can't remember what the hell it was. It was like a 18th century fighting the Indians kind of story, leather stocking tail things. I can't remember the context of it. And he was in a few other films, and he was quite a good actor. He was a straightforward actor. He took his craft quite nicely. No TV here. Well, that does limit it. Yes, there, Brian. A movie like The Mission, lots of drama, great music, but any accuracy at all? Oh, I think it was a long time ago. I'm trying to think if that was a thing involving conquistadors or something like priests coming into the Central America in the 18th century or not, or is that the newer one? Yeah, there may have been another title. So you've got to stump the RJ one, because if I have seen it, it's been a long, long time ago. As a non-religious believer, there are many films that involve religious subtext that I'm not exactly jumping on to see. If it's The Mission that I'm thinking of, they were based on historical incidents, and it was middling accuracy, because again, you got the one that I'm thinking of that related to 16th or 17th century stuff in the Americas, but I may not. I wouldn't want to swear on a stack of Charles Darwin on that, because I'm just riffing off of my memory on there. Missionary goes to convert Mexicans. Been ages. Yeah, you see. Yeah, it's. I think they were Spanish. In that whole area, be Spanish, because remember, the Portuguese were restricted to Brazil by papal edict, where they drew a line to divide up the New World. Heck, who's going to ask the Indians? Brazil got on the one side of the bump, and everything else was Spanish. Looked it up. Then it'd be Portuguese. Filmed in Santa Barbara? Wow. Some things are very unusual. I know the Mohicans, the brilliant one with Daniel Day-Lewis, that was filmed in North Carolina. I was flabbergasted that it was all filmed in North Carolina, everything. That was just fabulous use of setting. Lots of films are that pretend to be Kansas or filmed up in Canada, Edmonton and all that, including the Superman, the original Superman movie. And of course, I love I think the Flash, its main Star City is a thinly disguised Portland that they put some digital stuff in, because I know what the Portland skyline looked like, but all the location footing that they film is, I think, up in Vancouver, because there are some spots where I realize, no, I don't think there's a mountain range off in that direction. So, and there's not quite a big bay. So it flits around a lot. The Canadians have been very, very busy with their, okay. Something that was filmed not Santa Barbara, but farther south, that has such a neat bit, was the one with Peter O'Toole, man, that's a quirky little film. Whatsoever to do with history, but it's a charming, quirky, twisty, part paranoia, part action adventure thing with Steve Railsback, I think, is in it, and it's one, and it has a really remarkably score by Dominic Frontier, who did relatively little film work. He did the Outer Limits music. That's where I really remembered him, and it's a little minor film in your memory, I think, for watching. Well, thank you. Yes, yes. I try not to bore people. Anybody, as I said, that can come in, I suppose I should stick the stupid thingy up there in case he has noticed it lately. But I'm free for Hangout. That people who have video cam wants to come in and join the conversation, so it's not just me talking. Always been film buff. I came from a TV era. Everything got crammed onto the cable ghettos, where if you want to see a Warner Brothers movie, you have to have Turner Classic Movies, or you have to go on certain internet things to be able to see certain subject matter. It was in the old era, in the 50s and into the early 60s, when old movies went to die on television. You had watching films. The Warner Brothers Film Archive kind of got dumped on things, and I started being a film music buff, noticing that I could recognize individual composers. And there would hear this dun da da the Warner Brothers opening theme, and then suddenly you get these soaring violins and so forth in this bit thing. And I would be listening to the credits and stuff, and I go, boy, I wonder if that's Max Steiner. And then music by Max Steiner, and I go. So there were ones where I began to pay more and more attention to the film music aspect of things. The one area that I find most boring is we have got the crappiest film music. There's way too much Hans Zimmer, who is a talented composer, but he also can write a hell of a lot of boilerplate. And he's, by the way, Zimmer is the one that's done the music for Dunkirk. When he's on his game, effective. And if he's got a director that works very tightly with him in order to, and figuring out where they want to use the music, he has good sense of orchestral palette. He can make use of dissonance and interesting orchestral colors. He's a very talented composer. If he's in the big orchestral epic adventure mode, holy moly, that stuff can wear thin, and it becomes interchangeable. Yes, when he's not phoning it in. And he phones it in an awful lot, sewer tapes. Yeah, that's the problem. He's not the only composer to do that. If you listen to the later scores of Nicholas Rosa, he became a cliche. Last movie I saw was Interstellar. I actually just saw that on they were showing it on a free channel, so I was able to look at it because I hadn't seen it before. It was interesting. It was about a half hour too long. The music actually was fairly effectively done. It had a kind of an interesting kind of Twilight Zone-y plot that would have been a fine hour-long episode, but it's a giant 2.5-hour movie. And so there were some bits, I think, where a Darryl F. Zanuck style screen in the old golden days would have been sending memos downstream to trim it a little bit. So it ran a little long, and there was a time when it was a little artsy for its own good. It didn't build the proper setup of things for the prairie scenes and that. There was an implied worldview, technology, and culture that I kind of wanted to know more about, but didn't. Much of his time focusing in on the wheat fields. And so there's some quibbles I have with it. But I liked the movie overall, and it, wading through all of the length of it, I was okay with the ending of it. Losey, what are we talking about? You want to get into the combo? I was just discussing Interstellar. Danny Elfman is one of my favorites, sorely underutilized these days. I agree completely. Masterpiece breakout score, of course, was Batman. That is one that he should have got a goddamn nomination at least. And frankly, I think it should have won Best Score because it was a spectacular example of something that makes its movie. It was just astonishing. It's one of the most intricate. Name of the bang me over the head for my wickedness here. It was the lady that orchestrator, and she's also done her own scoring since then, and I can't remember her name. She's as much of a part of this as well. But Elfman is a very sophisticated musical guy. He knows Charles Ives. He knows Kurt Weill. You hear Kurt Weill all over the place in The Nightmare Before Christmas. My heavens. I mean, this would be Kurt Weill homage all the way through there. And I was, oh, no, I'm on here. Nobody can be too ugly to join, to come in on the video feed. My heavens, I look like Niccolo Machiavelli let out to dry. So no, don't complain about looks. Not when I'm the mug on the screen. But yeah, I'm a great bang bang on RJ head. Elfman. He tends to be played. He had a big falling out with what's his name that was doing the Spider-Man movies, Raimi, because Raimi apparently was not wanting him to kind of go where he wanted to go musically. And I don't think Raimi is that much of a musical sophisticate. Love to have a film where you could really let him go to do dissonance and polyrhythms and that, where to have some sophisticated music that's catching up to like 1910 musically, that we don't hear much of. I'm, of course, Red's Rhetoric was the record in my, so I'm not entirely, do you play Call of Duty? I have no idea what the hell that is. Oh, Call of Duty. Oh, the video game. No, I don't do video games at all. My niece's husband plays a variety of video games, and so does his son. You know, they spend enormous amounts of time glued in front of their monitor. I'm not a shoot 'em up type. I liked Myst. Wander around and explore things and solve puzzles, and I don't want to have to worry about rampaging aliens that I'm attacking because I've got to get the point values and figuring out what kind of ammunition I'm going to be having and whether I need to put on the silver snake armor or not. I mean, you know, to my mind, that's absolutely dreary. So I'm disconnected a lot. Even if I had the money in platforms and all of that, there would be very little there that I would ever want to play. I am very much not a typical person in that respect. The young people are very different, and they enjoy these things enormously, and therefore I'm never going to be able to be one with them until we all merge in the great mind beyond of the Matrix. The Elfman is an interesting composer. There are a couple clever composers when they're on their game. Some of the people that have spun off from the Zimmer world have done some interesting stuff, and Patrick Doyle has done some interesting scores. But ever since John Williams became the big kid on the block, the tendency to do operatic style wall-to-wall film scores has become the standard model. It doesn't work for every film. It isn't necessary for every film. The fact that a lot of execs, I think need that that's the case, it doesn't necessarily serve it well. Paul wants me to fill in next shift. Ah, well, see, that way you don't have to worry about watching old reruns of the Rifleman, Brian. You can be carrying your rifle around and be on traffic watch. For me, the film composers that just get my heart racing, Bernard Herrmann, a lot of the ones from the old classic era, more so even than John Williams. I date back farther than that. Alex North, the scores he did for Spartacus and Cleopatra, and they're powerful musically, they're ingenious. And then Bernard Herrmann, my heavens, the guy, century. I mean, the Twilight Zone theme and the so many of the Alfred Hitchcock movies. He was arguably one of the most sophisticated of the composers. He was a composer to begin with before he got into film. Movies about history, and one was the Ten Commandments, which has been made several times. I will say this, as a piece of delicious kitsch, the Mill one has a little place. He went out on his game. He pulled out the stops. He filmed it in spectacular VistaVision. It was big budget, stereophonic sound, the whole 9 yards. He was a stickler for details. So if you look at stuff, the kinds of costumes people had, the games they're playing, the physical infrastructure of things are all scrupulously accurate within the potboiler plot and a ham-fisted direction, because he never worked well with actors. He hired them like cattle. If the old cliche that Hitchcock said actors says, I never said are cattle. I said actors should be treated like cattle. The irony is that DeMille really did treat them like cattle. He hired talented people, and they came in and they're supposed to know their craft. He doesn't have to give them motivation. And it's hard to find a truly memorable performance, a stick in your ribs performance. These will be DeMille's movies, not just the Ten Commandments. Whereas Hitchcock, who supposedly treated actors like cattle, somehow extracted some of the most riveting performances, not only from major actors, but from supporting players that just up in your head and you never forget them. So there's a whole different universe between Hitchcock and DeMille, both of whom came from film era and persisted into sound. With the Bible's bullpucky bounds, yeah. The Ten Commandments is fun. Can use it as anti-religious propaganda. Because even as a little kid, Commandments, I knew enough from my Bible that I had from leftover from being kicked out of Sunday school that I would read the sections in the Exodus, and I'm going, this hardened Pharaoh's heart thing, that in the story, and it's revealing that every version of the Ten Commandments leaves that out. There was a big version of it that was done just kind of recently that did exactly the same shtick. They can't deal with that. Loved Hitchcock, Brian. Oh, yeah. I have more Hitchcock movies in my film collection than any. I think I have about 20 some odd of them, and that's about half of his oeuvre. Virtual film course just to watch Hitchcock films. And he worked between the films and his TV series. Almost everybody and his brother was in a Hitchcock production in one way or the other, either in front of the camera, behind the camera, some way or other, as writers and other connecting. And he was just of course, there was the awkward bit where his obsession with the blonde, mysterious woman finally got the better of him when he was putting a make on Tippi Hedren, and she pushed back. But by then, that was way far down the career line. But if you needed a single Hitchcock film into the sense of why this guy was such a brilliant filmmaker in every layer, watch Rear Window. Jimmy Stewart in it. You got Grace Kelly, who's worth the price of admission. God, one of the most beautiful women who ever lived. Wow, does she own a film just being on the screen? Thelma Ritter, as the little nurse in there, has some of the wonderful lines. You got Raymond Burr, and I can't tell you spoiler alert on that. You got a very ingeniously crafted score by Franz Waxman. Hitchcock. It's in a constrained setting where everything takes place just from the view in the room out in this giant multi-story set that was built, where everything is taking place, and he's focusing in on all the things you see around there. And so it's the essence of Hitchcock as film. Some of the shorts on YouTube, Dust, are reminiscent of Hitchcock style. Well, anything that makes a film relating to Hitchcock. Hitchcock invents the tracking shot, the traveling shot, the point of view shot, where you cut to the person's point of view angle, his playing around with context of stuff, and his use of the cinema force you to see what he wants you to see. Hitchcock movies ever. Yeah, that one is, it troubled people at the time because they didn't know quite what to make of it. But it's got all the pieces there as well. It's about obsession, essential Hitchcock storytelling. The book, if you're familiar with the movie, it's about a detective who has acrophobia, who is sucked into a plot that he doesn't realize, that's making use of the fact that he has a fear of heights so that a scam can be done. And eventually he tumbles onto it, the thing that he shouldn't, and that's the end of the story. Hitchcock modified the book because the scene in which Kim Novak, you see, it's about, I think, only about a third of the way into the movie, cover the solution to the mystery. Right then, you know what the mystery is about. And you're going, what? Why am I hearing this? And it's because it's a Hitchcock film. It's not a mystery. Wants you to know that information, right? Because now you are perceiving both Jimmy Stewart and Kim Novak's relationship completely differently, because you know information that's in her head, and therefore the behavior of everybody else takes on a tragic, doom-laden quality that wouldn't be there. Realize that Kim Novak, what she's doing is a dangerous thing to do, because she's in love with Jimmy Stewart's character. And if you don't have that information at that point, you don't get that impact. And that is pure Hitchcock, absolutely pure Hitchcock. A lot of that in great filmmakers, where by turning a scene around and putting it in a different order, something that you didn't see. You've seen Lawrence of Arabia, one of the great epics of all time, and if you can get the chance to see it in Blu-ray, boy, spectacular. Not too many films in Super Panavision 70. And the fabulous Maurice Jarre score. Maurice Jarre score. Blah, 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 my tangy's tangled up. Anyway, you see right in the beginning of the movie, Lawrence of Arabia, because he doesn't want you to be in suspense anytime during the film. So that all of the scenes later on, when Lawrence is in peril, he could get killed at any moment. You know, I know how he dies. It's on the motorcycle. And therefore you are not, and you're not in suspense there. Now you can watch Lawrence, idiot, a dick, courting disaster, pushing his luck again and again and again, because you know how he actually dies, and therefore you're not in suspense on a side issue. So great director. Citizen Kane is another one. You've got, in which you see the second Mrs. Kane all drunk and burbling about how things have fallen apart with her second husband and all that, but yet she still kind of loves him, and she's a frazzled old booze hound by then. And only later in the story do you see when Kane and what would have been a touching, sweet, humorous scene if it was in chronological order, sad, melancholy thing, because you know how it's going to turn out. So charming, and she seems so innocent, and now you can be focusing in on all the things that you can see, the seeds of what's going to go wrong. You know what happens, and it's in a different order. All of that. Nerd Writer has a great breakdown of how Hitchcock blocks a scene about vertigo. Oh yeah, there's a lot of the videos have background details, and they'll have editing things. Hitchcock did storyboards. He was one of the very first directors to really go that route with the same idea independently, because he came at it from an animator's point of view, where by definition, animated movie, you make a series of storyboards and then you have the fill-in crew. But that idea was really congenial to Hitchcock, because Hitchcock pre-edited the movie. The least interesting thing to him was the filming of the movie, because he had already worked the movie out, frame by frame by frame, the whole shebang. And it's very rare for him to improvise. There's only a few cases in his entire film career where he ever kind of tinkered with stuff and modified it a little bit. The scene in The Train, where the woman is strangled, and you have the scene glasses that have fallen off. So in the lens on the ground, you're seeing this distorted view, and you're not actually seeing the murder, you're kind of seeing the reaction of the murder. Lens mode. That was actually kind of a late addition, because he was having trouble figuring out how he wanted to stage that when they were actually getting into the film thing. And then they thought about, wait a minute, okay, so they had to build this giant thing that would be done up like a glass, and then refilm the scene, project it onto it so that it would be done into the thing that you finally see. But that's a relatively rare example. Hitchcock didn't like to work on location because he couldn't control it. Yeah, the Sand Kings, the Outer Limits episode. Oh, I wonder about that. No, I don't think so. There's a sand creature in that one. And matter of fact, that had the late Batman West was in that. They were just showing that as a homage. It's on MeTV at the wee hours. I had them on DVD years ago, because it was one of my favorite series that I kind of stumbled into. I think the Sand Kings, Me to the King of Sand is a good one. The Sand Kings. Yeah, you kids will have to riff off of that one, because I'm out of my depth on that one. You the RJ on that. There's some genres I'm not terribly interested in. There's a lot of horror genres I'm not fond of. A lot of nice love stories, light, pleasant comedies. I like to have a story that's got kind of an interesting kick to it, interesting period. Places that I've never been before. So if it's just set in the real world, excuse me, I can see the real world. So I don't really need to step beyond that. I think it would have a different reaction for growing up, because exploring the world via film. But I'm an old fart, so I'm not in a situation where I have to understand the human experience via cinema. A speculative standpoint, RJ, the Sand Kings, is that the Outer Limits episode or something else? You don't have an interest in sports? I'm no interested in that at all. I appreciate the skill of a sports figure and how they do the stuff, but like team sports, I don't have the gene for it. It's probably the same reason I'm an atheist. I don't exteriorize things. I don't group identify in that respect. So if you ask me, oh, are you following the Super Bowl? And I say, well, I think the team with the most points should win. And that's it. So all of the sports team identification, the idea of that you would be so rabidly enthusiastic for the team only because that's where you live, of an attitude that's just alien to me. Get Passepartout a reaction to, where you'd be fascinated about the way human beings deal with stuff. The ball-based is irrelevant on there. I'm more prone to be intrigued by individual sports like the Olympics and things like that. I can appreciate intellectually the skill that's involved in it. In fact, I'm probably more hearing a well-informed sports aficionado tell about why a sports person is so skilled than I am watching the sport itself. Cubs won again tonight. Oh, they're the ones that finally broke their World Series thing. Yeah, well, good for them. They had such a long drought. I'm happy for them just from the underdog's point of view. As an underdog myself, I can appreciate all of that. But if I'm prone to watch a Super Bowl, which I do once in a while, I see one team being kind of snitty because they're doing fouls more than they should. I take a moralist standpoint and I go, well, the other team is morally superior. They're better, so they should win. But I don't think that's how the typical person approaches the thing. Do like watching soccer riots on YouTube, though. I haven't done that. Well, and they get them the old cliche about hockey games. You know, they during the riot and fist fights, the hockey game broke out briefly. Playing, I think partly because I wasn't very sporty when I was a kid. I didn't have a great deal of coordination. I was a fast runner, not because anyone was chasing me, but I'm just a fairly agile. But for me, playing a game of croquet was fine because I didn't have to worry about eye-hand coordination. If you ever want to throw something valuable at me, catch it, you've made a bad decision right there because I don't have very good reaction times on those sorts of things. So needless to say, on the sports teams in high school during mandatory gym class, I was not. And I was usually benched a lot, and it was perfectly understandable because I was competent. My sister and others tried to teach me to golf one time. I have absolutely no coordination there. Even badminton, the damn shuttlecock moves too fast for me, so I'm terrible on that. Tracks 2 years, 440 records, fast guy. Yeah, I didn't have a great deal of stamina. Remember it was kind of funny. I was in high school. I can't remember, it was like sophomore. There was a track thing that we were doing, and they put me at the far outer realm because I was going to be the slow one. And it was a 100-yard dash. Well, for the first 50 yards, I was in the lead because I had a rather fast takeoff. Surprised at that, but I didn't have quite the lung power in that to sustain me for the 100 yards. So I didn't come in the top pack by the time we got down to the far end. But they were kind of surprised by how fast that little Jimmy kid was in terms of football or soccer or anything. And I didn't swim. Valuable in water. I could never learn how to swim. Oh, drowning things. Water in my eyes, anything like that. Same reason why I can't wear contact lenses. It would just drive me nuts. If I get an eyelash in my eye, I'm nuts because anything like that is just... So there are all sorts of biological systems that I have a limit on there. We were Ohio backward school, not much competition. Well, I lived in Spokane is a kind of a metropolitan area, about 180,000 people, and so I think Shadle had a couple thousand students. I think I think there were like 400 or so in the graduating high school class. So it was a fairly good large bunch, and Shadle has expanded even more. We have always had a fairly support for our schools here in Spokane, and of course we have all not quite as centralized as California, which I lived in for a while. A city of our size, I think we have fairly diligent support, and we have our little sports teams and all the rest, and of course the Zags. Everyone was going berserk when they got very perilously close to the basketball victory all there. They take their sports really seriously at EWU and Washington State University and Gonzaga University. This is as serious as you would find anywhere else, and therefore I'm out of the picture. About 4 classes the year I graduated was 318 students. Yeah, I don't think any of our high schools here in Spokane are that small. That they've expanded to where the school is like 3 times the size it was when I was there back in the 1970s. So We tend to have fairly large, consolidated, so they can have all of the upgradey things and the computer labs and all that kind of stuff, and operate off of the physical scale effectively. Yeah, there's the Shadle Park is 3 stories high. It's about the size of a typical shopping mall footprint for Shadle Park. North Central, they've just been rebuilding that. That's south of us. Yes, North Central High School is south of Shadle Park. That shows you how the city's expanded. Gosh, RJ is telling you things you don't ever want to know about the layout of Spokane, Washington. Who the F cares? It has around 3,700 now. Okay. Yeah, for people who come from areas around us, as soon as you get outside of the city, it drops off like a rock. So Cheney, which is the city that Eastern Washington University is, which is about 25 miles or so away from us, has its own little municipality. They have their own high schools and all that stuff, and they're substantially smaller. Stuff that goes on over in the Seattle area, where you can't throw a dead cat without running into a suburb. You got a completely different dynamic over there. What are you sipping on, RJ? Oh, it's just iced tea. I drink a lot of iced tea. First of all, it's cheap, and I like iced tea. If I ever were the point where I could afford to buy alcohol again, it would be wonderful to actually be able to drink alcohol during the drink segment of the movie nights. But I'm afraid it's been a while back on that one. Either a daiquiri or a rum and cola, or in the wintertime, it'd probably be sherry. I like sherry a lot. But nope, just plain old iced tea. I discovered, fascinated, that anybody can kind of perform this experiment, that ice sounds different in alcohol. An ice cube version of a daiquiri, I suddenly realized, wow, the pitch of the ice clinking is different than what happens in there. So there must be a fascinating acoustic variation in the viscosity and all that stuff that occurs with alcohol, or at least with rum. I don't know whether or not you could form, I suppose, an experiment with vodka and various other whiskeys and that, to see whether or not there is make like a musical instrument composed of ice. And of course, you would have to do it quickly or keep it in a frigid room to be able to hear a glockenspiel from the different pitches from the ice makes in various alcohol beverages. Yes, there's a whole new artistic venue that could be opened up. Cold Coca-Cola here, intelligently designed, of course. Yeah, I occasionally I'll drink. No, not a fan of beer, Nim. I'm the only member of the family. My mom, nothing would please her more after she was having a hard day out in the gardening to come in and have a nice cold Olympia beer. And she just loved that. For me, it's the hops guy. And there's a flavor about it. I'm not repelled by it, but it's just like, do I really want to spend my time drinking through this? There's once in a while, I found an occasional recipe. There was an interesting salmon in an Alaskan beer that was really quite tasty. For itself, in terms of that, now rum is my drink. You give me a rum daiquiri, and I'm a happy camper. Although there are times I'll try other kinds of drinks. A friend of mine bought me a few days ago when we were down listening to a concert. This bar, opera singer was doing a thing that there was a raspberry chocolate thing, and I think it had vodka in it. And they did a good job on that little puppy. That was tasty. Yeah. So I think the fruit combination with the chocolate liqueur and all that, it was very, very effectively, very nicely balanced. They had good food there in that too. Their pizza thingies and stuff. They're very, very nice place. We got an awful lot of Spokane. We've always liked restaurants. In fact, a lot of the fast food places would try out their new products here because we have kind of a universal demographic that is similar to the entire United States in a lot of ways. So they could kind of see what we got going on here. We have a lot of churches and a lot of restaurants, and in the old days, a lot of bordellos and taverns. And so we're an interesting mix, hyper-conservative and hedonist all at the same time. Oh, you're on your 9th and 10th beer tonight. There we go. There is a sound change with hot water in a cup. I can't remember the name of the effect though. Yeah, so it could be because alcohol would be changing dynamics of the water in that as well. But I do know that there was a distinctly different sound that ice cubes were making in the rum and cola do the same thing. But whether or not there actually would be differences that you could detect by ear, the proof of the alcohol or not, I have no clue. I put like a jigger, not quite a jigger of rum in a good sized tumbler, and then fill up the rest with the ice and the other stuff. So it's I followed my mom's rule when she would do cocktails and stuff, and it says, you know, you want to taste the alcohol, even if you can't taste it. So you know, so when we would do these things in the holidays and that for the relatives and that, expected to be able to taste the alcohol around my mom. Yeah, there's probably a name for almost everything, but I can't always remember the stuff. I know that the name of this thing is the Philtrum. I remember that is because of dear old Tony Randall. He used to appear on Johnny Carson a lot, and he was just a word nut. He told him that one time, and it's just stuck in my brain ever since. So I always know that's the damn Philtrum. F-U-L-T-R-U-M, I think, or F-I-L. Yeah. A sonic Doppler. The hot chocolate effect, also known as the Alasonic effect. Ooh, we're starting to go punny. Yeah, so anyway, I've been still blathering on in here. We got 11 viewers knocking around. Still nobody with a camera that wants to pop in and say hi. From Dunkirk. I suppose I could compare Dunkirk with A Bridge Too Far, A Film Too Long. Example of, ooh, 1 shot of Myers Dark Rum, 1 shot of Malibu Rum. Wow, 8 ounces of pineapple juice, best pina colada ever. I have to confess I'm not a pineapple juice fan. Acidic, icky to it that is a flavor I've never particularly liked. So I will leave you all the pina coladas you want, AJS. You can take all of the ones off of my rationing card and work on those. Yeah, pineapple. I never liked martinis. I think it's probably because of the vermouth. It was that never impressed me much. But that's just the foibles of life. We all have our own taste. As I said, I don't like beer. And I don't like coffee either. To me, the only time I'll drink a coffee is if it's heavily mixed with whiskey in a coffee nudge or something like that. Then I can tolerate it. But the flavor, me much. And I'm the only member of my family that doesn't drink coffee. Boy, they slurp it up like mad. But it's one that I've never particularly liked. But we'll eat. I like dark chocolate, really dark, unsweetened chocolate, and baker's chocolate. I can eat baker's chocolate straight. Yum, yum. And I've seen grown men with big tattoos blanch at the prospect of that. And that shows you my metabolism is different than yours. To be a human being, I am actually an alien. Oh, well, yeah, I imagine in the deeper winter. And again, if it were blended with things, there have been times when I've had alcoholic versions of it. And Bailey's cream and other kinds of things blended into it that once in a while, under the right circumstances, it's okay. But boy, I can go years and years and years without another. I don't need the thing to get up in the morning. When I get up in the morning, or in the afternoon if I'm just going on my body clock, I'm operational. So I don't have a learning curve thing. Lisa and I went on a trip to visit my sister down in Louisiana. She warned me, do not talk to her when we get up. She does not want to have it at this point. She is not in operation function mode. Whereas I'm a chatty Cathy all the time. I'm bubbling and talking about this and that and thus and such. So I had to just zip it until really breakfast. Burner on that. So everybody's got their own metabolism and the way they do. Hershey's Special Dark Bar. That's getting close, yeah, because that's a dark chocolate. One of the best chocolate companies I ever bumped into, and I think they're available online, but I've never been able to afford buying stuff from them. But they're up in Vancouver. up in BC, and they are Rogers chocolate, and wow, that's good shit. When you walk into their factory is on site up there, just north of the Empress Hotel, and you just get this rush of pure chocolate aroma in their little waiting room. They do white chocolate and various other and milk chocolates and that as well, but they do a really powerful, impressive chocolate that if they kept up to the same standards that I know, 20 years ago, that's a num num. I can't remember whether it's, I think it's Rogers with a D. The fact that it's from Vancouver, if they're still running, operating in Victoria up there. Check it out. Victoria is a fun place to visit. I always love going there. Now I don't have a passport, so I wouldn't be able to do that until I would get one. But Bouchard Gardens is in Victoria, and wow, that's this garden. Just neat, neat, neat. Oh, I'm preparing some high school teaching material about dinosaurs. Anything interesting I'd include that I won't find in a textbook? Wow. Well, you definitely won't find, William, the latest material on that new systematics taxonomy that is supporting the idea that sauropods and theropods are not closely related, that they split off independently. And it's a new paper, just came out this year. I think it was open access or somebody, it was in Science magazine. And it caused a little bit of a kerfuffle because of the a kerfuffle because everyone was so used to looking at it in the old way. But when I looked at the material, I'm going, this doesn't surprise me. The Herrerasaurs are, if you know, the Ornithischian and Saurischian dinosaurs are the classic group, the bird hip and the lizard hip dinosaurs. And then there were these oddball Herrerasaurs that looked kind of like a standard theropods thing, except it's got a little bit more Ornithischian-ish of its pelvic bone. And they weren't quite sure how they were fitting into things. For quite a while, they were kind of pigeonholed as unusual Saurischians. But the formatting that the new cladistic analysis, and there's been new fossil material in that that's come along since then, and the bunch did a whole new analysis of it that just came out, and not to my surprise, they basically put dinosaurs nesting off with the sauropods fairly early on in the dinosaur lineage, and then another group later on splits into your theropods and Ornithischian dinosaurs. And to my mind, that actually made quite a lot of sense. Oh, good, finding that. Hey, yeah, Brian, if you're finding that paper, I'm trying to think of in the group that did that. It's a big, long pile of names, and it's literally just been this year. So it's a fairly recent material. Anyway, this is me because of the distribution of feathers and feather-like placode components that you find. All are in that theropod cluster. And there don't seem to be any indication that any Saurischian has anything that's, they've got a bunch of scoots and all sorts of stuff that stick out. They've got things on some of the late Cretaceous titanosaurs and all of that. So there's a lot of genetic things going on for bony integuments. But that feather system is much more specialized, revealing that a feather-ish thing that looks like it's probably a tail sexual display pops up on the Psittacosaurus, the most recent Psittacosaurus fossils that have been found. That the Psittacosaurids are Ornithischian dinosaurs, small bipedal critters with a little predentary bone that then leads off into, or they're bipedal, and then leads off into the protoceratopsids, and then those migrate into North America, which then turn into the ceratopsids. So it was interesting that they were finding these potentially feather-like integument features on an Ornithischian side of the fence. the new phylogeny is valid, then it's a good chance that you won't find that stuff popping up in quite the same way if they do it all over on the Saurischian sauropod, brontosaur, apatosaurus, brachiosaurus, fill in the blank side. So it's an ongoing science field. I'm trying to think of what else might be. Something that would be kind of, oh, James Downard, is it on your WordPress? I seem to have lost it around my geo stuff. Oh, gosh, oddly, just a couple of days, I spent about half an hour explaining to a girl at work why pterosaurs were not ancestors of birds, but birds are dinosaurs. Oh, yes, indeed. Well, I will stick up because I go into a lot of these issues. It's older, but it's still got a lot of crap in it that's accurate. I'll put the link up to Revolutionary episode, and it's all free, unlike Slam Dunk that people have to actually buy, on dinosaur down here, 2, 3 Mac revolutions, blah, 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 blah. And that's basically a book-length work that is not a fit, and therefore I didn't have to worry about all the damn copyright crap. Oh, let me see. Where's my other window? Too many windows. Too many windows. There we go. And Zot. It's at my website that all of you people out there should have bookmarked and have so you can get to, which is the Troubles in Parasite site, where people can put up questions if they want me to do videos on particular topics. You can communicate with me there if you're not on Twitter, all that kind of crap. And that .com is the main one where all the PDFs and stuff are. And then I found that there were people who were having conniption fits on their iPhones because you can't do PDFs in that easily. Friend went through and took at least the new modules and converted them to HTMLs, which we need theoretically to do yet more of. But remember, all of this is bloody freebie because I don't have money to do anything. And I'm scraping along from one day to another. Hint, hint, GoFundMe. I'll put my shameless plug on there. I am still way below when it comes to Patreons. Definitely tell you, because I just got snarked today by a creationist who said, well, how are you going with your GoFundMe? How are you managing to be successful there? Ha, ha, ha. And I say, yeah, that's quite true. Just 300 just left on your BM bar. All the material there at the main website, all of that's freebie and share it freely, though that's all there. 3 macroevolutionary episodes. I went into the reptile mammal transition and Cambrian explosion and dinosaur evolution. So to give a sense about all of that. Now we need to find that paper. A fellow on, God, what the hell was one of the authors on that? Yipes. It's so far back that I can't figure, just going through my recent files on the pick forever. So I got to figure out, I think whether Philip Center was one of the people who did it. Guys on it. So I'll stick that in my navigation field and see what we got in here. And it got a ton. It wasn't him. Probably going to have to Google it. That'll probably be the only prep because it should be straightforward enough. New dinosaur phylogeny. Theropods, sauropods. See whether or not. Doodly 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 doodle. All the time when I can't remember because I can't remember the specific title or author. And let's see, Ornithischia rises. That's probably, oh, new hypothesis, Nature, March 23rd. Oh, little puppy up. I hate it when the little swirly circle takes forever. I'm singing in the rain, just singing in the rain. That's one of my favorite musicals. Just feeling unhappy again. And that should hopefully be it. 130 years. Oh, actually, fewer authors than I was thinking. One that I'm referring to. Here we present a hypothesis. Okay, I'll stick the direct link onto it, and I think it's available as a kind of freebie thing. Over here, back over to there. Yep, Aaron, Norman, and Barrett. You beat me to it, you bastard. And so although there were a lot of bloggers who were going, shock, horrors, sauropods and theropods not closely related, I'm going, yeah, it doesn't surprise me because of those damned parasaurs. Dynamic going on there. So let's see, what are the other, one little question that you might want to call attention to for your class. I'll find. It is very intriguing to me. There are no really fully aquatic dinosaurs. With spinosaurids and others that are apparently like Kodiak bear types, and dinosaurs apparently could swim fairly well. Theropods were quite good swimmers. There's examples of apparently some allosaur types dog paddling after a fleeing sauropod in the water. So that stuff pops up. But fully aquatic ones, like the counterparts of your crocodiles that have completely aquatic forms, and of course your plesiosaurs and pliosaurs and ichthyosaurs and all the other saurs that are knocking around. They're mosasaurs. Obviously, reptiles made it into the ocean environment again and again and again, but they tended to be earlier on in the game, in the Triassic. Argument that the blind paleontologist Vermeij has argued, and I find a fairly good one, is that it's much harder to invade a new niche if it's already occupied by other organisms. And so because so many aquatic marine reptiles were already in play by the time the dinosaurs rose into prominence and diversified enough that you would get the kind of luck of the draw thing, that it was a bit too late. As yet, we don't know of any example of a fully aquatic dinosaur. And if they do come along, gee, I will be amazed and delighted. But nevertheless, they haven't happened along that. Then the other issue, of course, to remind everyone of, the dinosaurs, in a way, have never stopped being successful. But they've just done it in a more specialized thing. Because there were about 20 dinosaur families involving maybe like 500 genera at the moment. And so you got, a few thousand species maybe. And that's over many millions of years. Do we have all of them? Probably not. We probably missed a lot. But the flappy versions of dinosaurs that survived, there's 10,000 species of those. They dominate the air. There's very few instances of where bats can get headways unless they're in a spot where the birds are asleep. So that nocturnal environment works well. And about the only times you find daytime flying bats are ones in which you don't have a lot of bird competition. Are just relentless little bastards, and as we can all know from Tippi Hedren and Hitchcock, see, that connects us back up to we can see how incredibly powerful they've been as an adaptive force. By the way, for Hitchcock, that's one that doesn't have any music. That's why I think it's so creepy for a lot of people, because there's no music to tell you what you're supposed to feel emotionally. And the Bernard Herrmann did work on it. In fact, all the little electronic bird sounds and stuff that were in there, that in a way is the music of the movie. So they were very careful to construct these little things where the little crows are going, that's all composed stuff for the show to get just the right sound and the way he wanted to do it. But there's no conventional music score. And it's the only Hitchcock film in the sound era that doesn't actually have one. I got to check the things over here. Clockwork Orange flashback. Too many windows fell off a stream for a minute. Technical term. Heck, why not? Yeah, heck-a-mighty. Let's. I never like to be too. Yes, what the hell would be? You could say, rather than prone to the capacity for vertical liftoff. I think flappy works handier, don't you think? Another link all researchers need on predatory journals. blswiftweebly.com standalone journals. Oh, I'm not familiar with that one. Let me that and see what comes up on that. I investigate one thing after another. Fuzzy is so flappy is okay. Yeah, yeah. Well, and we now know that there's so much going on. The little flappies, that it's not just the lineage that's leading to, but also their cousins and these microraptors that's got wings on 4 limbs, and that it's very in terms of the dynamics, and that's just the little snapshots from a sparse fossil record in this area, because anything that's as small as a bird and that has a relatively lightweight bone structure like that, we have the same problem with pterosaurs. The early history of pterosaurs is pretty murky, and for damn good reason, because they're very small animals. Rhamphorhynchids and all that are about the size of a crow, and they have very lightweight bones, and about the only time we ever find evidence of them, it's that one of them breaks its neck slamming into some anoxic river or lake somewhere, and gets fossilized relatively easily. Later on, better things where you start having larger forms and you see more in the way of trackways. And then, of course, the other interesting issue, which kind of violates Vermeer's doctrine, it's that birds started invading the air even though there were pterosaurs. An argument that's being made in the pterosaur paleontology bunch that actually, this will be a subject you could bring up in your story, William, because this is kind of cutting-edge debate. Did pterosaurs start developing the great big pterodactyl Quetzalcoatlus super-duper glider size form because our flappy type pterosaurs were basically being outcompeted in their niche by birds? And so the birds, relatively small size, even the largest birds today with the condors and that, don't get anywhere near as massive as these huge coatlids did. So it looks like there's an interesting niche partitioning that's going on in the pterosaurs versus the birds that we're just now working out a lot of the fuzzy bits about. So is that another good subject for you, William? Hexeropteryx, apex predator of the pterosaur. Isn't that one of those monster that's probably kind of grounded? It's so big it probably didn't fly a heck of a lot, and it's thought of as essentially a ground predator. I'll have to look to see if I got biography by under that title or not, because not everything lists under the same names. They may not mention it in the abstract. Let's see if I can get XXOG. And I got a little bit of dyslexia of the typing at times. Throw me off. To watch to make sure what I'm typing is what I'm actually. Yeah, I don't see any matches thing in here. Whoops, that's got to eliminate a letter. That's why. Nope, still none. So whatever it is, the paper, if I do have something in on it, it may not be on that. I'll have to probably put another one on here under my will need to look up. Any work, it's always wise to point out to anybody, especially the ecology field today, that if a book is 10 years old, it's old. That there's probably a hell of a lot of active paleontology that's happened at the cutting edge. That particularly in the 90s, there's been a lot of movement in the field. So even though I have a lot of dinosaur books that are still high quality and of interest, dream of trying to presume that every bit of it has stayed current on the big picture aspects from a work that's from 1985 or 1990 or whatever, because there's just too many new blips on the scope. More of the newer work, of course, is paying much closer attention to paleogeography, to work out how the critters are interacting in ecological environments in relation to the geographical relationships of things, and of course the fact that the continents have shifted and all of that. So the dinosaurs are an ideal subject matter because you're bringing in plate tectonics, you're bringing in climate issues, the fact that it was quite warm, they had about a 30–35% oxygen level, particularly in the later end of the dinosaur period. We have environmental issues with the Deccan traps and the destabilization of the ecosystem in the Cretaceous, and then of course the big asteroid splat that popped down. By the way, tip 1.2 on the mass extinction issues has a whole slew of technical references that I keep up to date as they come in on the mass extinction issue. And I haven't updated that, I think, in a few months, but nevertheless, it's still pretty up to date. And it'll give you all the skivvies about the various causal things and about the issue about methane bursts and the volcanic deposits, which are highly correlated with most of the mass extinctions, and then your rarer but occasionally annoying asteroid splats. Buggering, wow, sounds like you've been to Ken Ham's Ark. Yeah, the giraffe, yeah, about the size of a giraffe, but only went about 500 pounds, so it was assumed to fly. Yeah, I think I've seen some stuff of it, and if memory serves me, it's on the ground if we're talking about the same critter, and that it was a ground predator, but presumably all of these things would have a capability of at least doing gliding material. Even the early birds, we have to remember, didn't have that powerful sternum that we see in the later birds. And so, although Archaeopteryx, I think, as I think Henry D said, although Archaeopteryx could fly better than a sack of potatoes, but not much better. And until you had that powerful sternum muscle attachment develop, you didn't have the ability to take off from a standing start. You would have to kind of jump off of something and get some flight going. And it's a long way down the road until you have something like a hummingbird, which, by the way, you'll see how small hummingbirds are. Their little muscles are just going gangbusters, and they got to feed constantly to maintain that little fuel tank because they burn it up rather quickly. So they're the jet pack of flying organisms. Most of what I have is behind paywalls, yeah. I, being an impoverished scholar, I have to make a great deal of wriggle-arounds. So ResearchGate and Academia EDU, and of course the sweet little paleontologists and stuff that post their papers freebie on their websites. These are all very, very important things. And in some instances, you know, you can get stuff free that you have to read online free at least at JSTOR and all of that. So since it's so critical in my analytical work to be able to see the primary source complete, the more I can do that, the better. We have hundreds of hummingbirds around here, almost as many as we have lizards. Yeah, not many hummingbirds up in my neck of the woods. I think we got a lot more over on, in fact, my niece has a hummingbird thingy over there, but we're a bit drier and awkwarder over here. It's like something we don't have in our neck of the woods are fireflies. And it was delighted when I finally went back into the barbarian East many, many years ago and saw fireflies for the first time. Cool, I'd only read about them. And they're cute little things. And we're lucky enough that we don't have a lot of the stuff. We're too far north for the killer bees and scorpions and stuff. A lot of poisonous critters. Just it gets cold here, so we're able to withstand a lot of that stuff. We don't have a heck of a lot of really noxious spiders, although there are a few. We got a little bit of ticks and stuff like that. If you go camping, you got to pay a little bit of attention to that. So. A lot of the awkward afflictions that some places in the country have to deal with, we don't have up here, and I'm happy. Infestations, wow. Yeah, oh, BJ, I haven't seen fireflies since the 1960s. Wow, egret. I wouldn't be thinking that egrets could infest. You know, what are they going around in gangs and beating up on starlings? What exactly do they do, Brian? Yeah, I'm not sure, but we have a little bit of owls here. I hear them every once in a while. We've got some bald eagles. They have some nests that are on big poles that they put up for them around in here. There's one of our secular group members who's a big birder, And if he were on the beam, he could tell you all the different birds that he spotted around here because he goes out and looks for them. All bugs and lizards. The cattle egret. Oh, okay. I didn't know. I was thinking an egret being something bigger, but there again, you stumped the RJ. Quite so much. So they're a little small critter that goes around and pesters cattle. Okay. Yeah, I was thinking something that was more like a loon or something that was actually quite large that'd be walking around. But that shows you I don't know everything. Group and get aggressive. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of territorial animals in that will do. All birds, if they function in a flock thing, you can get into it. But the Deinonychids may have functioned in that. Some of this behavior, that's another reason. There's another lesson that dinosaur class is the issue what we see in modern bird behavior and dynamics was present in at least the theropod line. The issue of were feathers developing as sexual displays, tail feathers and that, independent of feather flight. There's an argument to be made for that. Nesting behavior, brooding behavior, going concern to figure out how much of that actually was in the case with the dinosaurs. In other words, it was not a new novel feature of birds. The one thing that just screamed dinosaurs is the fact that the birds are bipedal and habitual bipedal. And the idea that it must have evolved from an animal that already had that bipedal thing down was really kind of a no-brainer. Bats and pterosaurs are also quadrupedal, but bats, the moment they land on the ground, they're clambering around clumsily on all fours, and that's because they developed from four-legged rodents. So the only group in your face bipedal are the dinosaurs. So it just from a dynamic structure as to a standing start that gives you a lot of pre-adaptations, that was reasonable. And then when they discovered more and more about the internal anatomy of the Deinonychids and all of that in the 1960s, Ostrom and that work, that really just clinched the deal, except for the institution and the holdouts with Alan Fiducia and all the rest that are just digging in their heels, but I don't think it's going to hold. Well, I've been dither-dathering along quite a lot here, and we'll close this one down. Thank you for all hanging in. This was just my second effort at a live chat thing, and I was curious kind of to see how many people would join in and whether or not people would find me out and join up in the video brigade, which didn't happen. See, I'm one of these that I'm hoping to have a network thing that if I learn about something quickly, or you learn about me quickly, that we can kind of jump in and improvise rapidly. And I'm assuming I've got people all over the place that are following me. There's people in Australia and England and all that. So there's almost every possible time zone. No matter what time it is I'm on, there's probably somebody knocking around that can join in on the thing. So we can kind of play around with all this stuff. Well, thank you so much. I'll be stopping as a broadcast and shutting things down so there will not be such a panic. And I will leave you with my pretend Inspector Clouseau.